The Galactic Healthcare Accreditation Board had established very specific guidelines for medical vessels operating in contested space territories. Every ship bearing the universal medical insignia had to maintain strict neutrality, provide aid to any species regardless of political affiliation, and staff their vessels with certified medical professionals from recognized civilizations. The human medical frigate, Mercy's Edge, technically followed all these regulations, though their interpretation of certain protocols would later become the subject of heated debate in medical ethics committees across 17 star systems. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Sarah Chen had been running medical supply routes through the Outer Rim for 8 years, long enough to know that the galaxy's most dangerous sectors weren't always marked on the navigation charts. Her ship carried a crew of 43, including some of the most experienced trauma nurses in human space. What made the Mercy's Edge unique wasn't just its advanced medical facilities or its impressive pharmaceutical inventory, it was the fact that every single nurse abroad had volunteered for deep space duty after completing tours in Earth's most challenging emergency departments. Head Nurse Jennifer Martinez had earned her credentials in the trauma centers of Neo-Chicago, where a typical Friday night involved treating everything from hovercar accidents to the occasional gang war casualty. She'd requested transfer to deep space medical duty because, as she put it during her interview, at least in space, the drunk patients can't stumble back in through the emergency doors 20 minutes after you've patched them up. Her philosophy about nursing was simple and direct. Every patient was either stable or becoming stable, and her job was to make sure they chose the right option. The nursing staff she'd assembled reflected her no-nonsense approach to healthcare. There was Patricia Williams, a pediatric specialist who could calm a screaming Altarian youngling with nothing more than a stern look and a lollipop that somehow tasted like home to every species that tried it. Emergency nurse David Johnson had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict which patients were going to cause problems before they'd even finished materializing on the transport pad. Surgical nurse Amanda Foster could thread a suture through a moving target while blindfolded, a skill she'd developed during her residency in the asteroid mining colonies where the artificial gravity frequently malfunctioned. The ship's medical bay occupied 3 full decks of the Mercy's Edge, with facilities that could handle everything from routine checkups to complex multi-species surgical procedures. The nurses had spent months customizing their workspace, adding what they called efficiency modifications that hadn't exactly been approved by the ship's original designers. These modifications included additional storage compartments for medical supplies, improved lighting systems for emergency procedures, and what the maintenance crew had learned not to ask too many questions about several pieces of equipment that seemed to serve dual purposes beyond their original medical functions. Operating in the frontier sectors meant dealing with patients who didn't always arrive through conventional means. The Mercy's Edge regularly treated miners from unstable asteroid claims, traders who'd had unfortunate encounters with space debris, and occasionally refugees from various conflicts that weren't supposed to be happening in neutral space. The nursing staff had developed protocols for virtually every medical emergency imaginable, plus several that medical schools claimed were impossible. What they hadn't specifically prepared for was the possibility that someone might be foolish enough to view their medical ship as a target rather than a sanctuary. The galaxy had certain unwritten rules about medical vessels, conventions that even the most desperate criminals generally respected. Hospital ships were considered neutral territory, off-limits to both military action and criminal enterprise. It was one of the few agreements that transcended species boundaries and political affiliations. The nursing staff of the Mercy's Edge had heard stories about pirates operating in the outer sectors, but these were generally small-time operations that targeted cargo haulers and passenger transports. Professional criminals understood that attacking medical ships was bad for business, should draw the wrong kind of attention from law enforcement agencies across multiple star systems, and had a tendency to turn the entire galactic community against you. Medical ships were also notoriously unprofitable targets, carrying supplies that were difficult to fence and equipment that required specialized knowledge to operate. Head nurse Martinez had been reviewing patient charts in the main medical bay when the ship's proximity alarms began their gentle chiming. The Mercy's Edge was currently en route to Kepler Station, carrying medical supplies for a mining colony that had experienced a severe industrial accident. Their cargo hold contained everything from basic first aid supplies to sophisticated surgical equipment, along with enough pharmaceutical products to stock a small hospital. It was valuable cargo, but the kind of value that required legitimate medical credentials to access. The alarm pattern indicated another vessel had dropped out of hyperspace nearby. Nothing unusual for a well-traveled shipping lane. Captain Ch's voice came through the intercom with routine professionalism, announcing that they were being hailed by another ship requesting medical assistance. This was standard procedure, and deep space medical ships were required to respond to distress calls regardless of the circumstances. And the Mercy's Edge had built its reputation on never refusing aid to those who needed it. Nurse Martinez finished updating her patient files and began preparing for what she assumed would be another routine emergency response. The medical bay was already configured for incoming trauma cases. With surgical suites prepped and emergency supplies readily accessible, the nursing staff had performed this drill hundreds of times, transforming from a peaceful medical facility into a fully operational trauma center in minutes. What none of them realized was that the distress call was about to become significantly more complicated than their standard emergency protocols had anticipated. The vessel that had intercepted them wasn't carrying patients in need of medical care. It was carrying a crew of space pirates who had made the unfortunate calculation that a medical ship would be both valuable and defenseless. Their leader, a career criminal named Marcus Vega, had spent the last 3 months planning what he believed would be the perfect heist. Vega had researched the Mercy's Edge extensively, studying its shipping schedules, cargo manifests, and crew compositions. His intelligence suggested that medical ships carried minimal defensive capabilities and were staffed primarily with non-combatant personnel who were ethically committed to avoiding violence. The medical supplies and pharmaceutical products aboard would be worth a fortune on the black market, and the ship's advanced medical equipment could be sold to any number of organizations that operated outside galactic law. What his research had failed to account for was the particular variety of human medical professionals who chose to work in the galaxy's most dangerous sectors. The nurses aboard the Mercy's Edge hadn't volunteered for deep space duty because they were looking for a quiet, peaceful career. They'd requested frontier assignments because they thrived in high-stress situations and possessed the kind of practical, problem-solving skills that came from years of dealing with medical emergencies under the worst possible conditions. As the pirate ship moved into position alongside the Mercy's Edge, the nursing staff was completing their pre-arrival preparations. With the calm efficiency of professionals who'd handled every conceivable medical crisis, they had no idea that they were about to demonstrate exactly why human medical personnel had developed such a formidable reputation throughout the galaxy, or that their response to the coming situation would become legendary in nursing schools. Across human space, the Mercy's Edge continued its steady course toward Kepler Station, its medical bay fully prepared to receive patients and its nursing staff ready to provide the kind of care that had made human medical ships the most respected emergency responders in the galaxy. In just a few minutes, they would discover that their reputation for healing could be just as intimidating as any weapon when applied by professionals who truly understood the art of making people feel better whether they wanted to or not. Marcus Vega considered himself a student of opportunity. In his 15 years of what he euphemistically called independent commerce, he developed an eye for identifying the perfect target. The Mercy's Edge represented everything he looked for in a prize, high-value cargo, minimal security, and a crew bound by professional ethics that prevented them from fighting back effectively. His research team had spent months analyzing medical ship operations, and their conclusions were encouraging for someone in his line of work. Standing on the bridge of his vessel, the Crimson Tide, Vega reviewed the tactical assessment one final time. Medical ships operated under strict neutrality protocols that prohibited them from carrying serious defensive weaponry. Their crews consisted primarily of healthcare professionals who had sworn oaths to preserve life rather than take it. Most importantly, medical ships were required to respond to distress calls, making them predictable and easy to intercept in deep space. His second-in-command, Elena Rodriguez, had initially expressed reservations about targeting a medical vessel. "It's going to bring heat from every law enforcement agency in the sector," she'd warned during their planning sessions. Medical ships are supposed to be off-limits. Even the worst pirates generally leave them alone. Vega had dismissed her concerns with the confidence of someone who had never encountered serious resistance from his chosen victims. "That's exactly why they're perfect targets," he'd explained. "Nobody expects medical ships to be hit, so they don't prepare for it. We get in, grab the supplies, and disappear before anyone even realizes what happened. By the time word gets out, we'll be 3 systems away." The crew of the Crimson Tide consisted of 37 career criminals, most of whom had been working together for several years. They specialized in quick, efficient raids on commercial vessels, preferring targets that offered maximum profit with minimum risk. Their standard operating procedure involved overwhelming their victims with superior numbers and firepower, securing valuable cargo, and departing before authorities could respond. Lieutenant Jake Morrison, their tactical officer, had developed detailed schematics of the Mercy's Edge based on publicly available information about similar medical frigates. Standard medical ship configuration, he'd briefed the boarding teams. 3 decks of medical facilities, minimal crew quarters, and cargo holds full of pharmaceuticals and medical equipment. The nursing staff will probably lock themselves in their quarters the moment we breach the hull. The boarding teams had been organized into 3 groups, each tasked with securing different sections of the medical ship. Team Alpha would take the bridge and communication systems. Team Beta would secure the medical bays and prevent any crew from destroying valuable equipment. And Team Charlie would focus on the cargo holds where the most valuable pharmaceutical supplies were stored. Chief among Vega's assumptions was that medical professionals, regardless of species, were fundamentally non-violent individuals who would prioritize patient safety over material possessions. His intelligence suggested that human nurses, in particular, were known for their compassionate nature and strict adherence to ethical guidelines that prohibited them from causing harm to others. What his research had failed to uncover was the specific background of the nursing staff aboard the Mercy's Edge. The databases he'd accessed contained general information about medical ship operations, but nothing about the individual qualifications and experience levels of the crew members. His intelligence team had assumed that deep space medical assignments attracted healthcare professionals seeking quiet, peaceful careers away from the chaos of planetary medical centers. The reality was precisely the opposite. The nursing positions aboard frontier medical ships were among the most competitive assignments in human healthcare, reserved for professionals who had demonstrated exceptional skill under extreme pressure. Mercy's Edge didn't recruit nurses who wanted to escape challenging situations. It specifically sought out individuals who thrived in them. As the Crimson Tide moved into position, Vega's confidence was bolstered by what appeared to be a textbook medical ship response to their fabricated distress call. The Mercy's Edge had immediately altered course to provide assistance, just as their protocols required. The medical ship's captain had followed standard procedures, requesting details about the nature of the emergency and preparing to receive patients for treatment. "They're buying it completely," reported Communications Officer Lisa Park. "Medical ship is requesting permission to send over a medical team. They want to know how many casualties we're dealing with and what kind of injuries they should prepare to treat." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Vega smiled with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding exactly as he'd planned. The medical ship's crew was so focused on their humanitarian mission that they'd completely dropped their guard. In just a few minutes, his boarding teams would be aboard the Mercy's Edge, and the largest pharmaceutical heist in sector history would be underway. His boarding team leaders were making final preparations for what they expected to be a routine operation. Team Alpha leader Carlos Santos had briefed his squad on standard intimidation techniques for dealing with civilian crews. Remember, these are medical professionals, he'd emphasized. They're not going to put up any resistance. Keep your weapons visible, speak in loud, authoritative voices, and they'll comply with everything we ask. Team Beta was led by former military operative Diana Chen, who joined Vega's crew after being dishonorably discharged for misconduct. Her team was responsible for the most delicate part of the operations, securing the medical facilities without damaging the valuable equipment they'd come to steal. The key is speed, she'd told her squad. Get the medical staff restrained and isolated before they can trigger any emergency protocols. Team Charlie's mission was considered the simplest. Of the 3 assignments, led by demolitions expert Tommy Williams, their job was to access the cargo holds and begin loading pharmaceutical supplies onto the Crimson Tide. The medical ship's cargo would be secured behind standard commercial locks, easily bypassed by anyone with basic criminal skills. None of the boarding team leaders had bothered to research human medical education or the specific training requirements for deep space nursing assignments. They were unaware that human nurses received extensive training in crisis management, emergency response procedures, and what medical schools called adaptive problem solving under extreme stress. They also didn't know that the particular nurses aboard the Mercy's Edge had specifically requested frontier duty because they found routine medical work insufficiently challenging as the Crimson Tide extended its docking clamps toward the medical ship. Vega allowed himself a moment of premature satisfaction. In his experience, the hardest part of any heist was usually the planning phase. Once the actual operation began, most civilian crews simply surrendered rather than risk injury or death defending corporate property. The Mercy's Edge appeared to be cooperating fully with their false distress call, positioning itself to allow the pirates' ship to dock. The medical ship's captain had even transmitted their medical manifest, ostensibly to help prepare appropriate treatment for the pirates' fictitious casualties. What she'd actually done was provide Vega with a detailed inventory of exactly how much his prize would be worth on the black market. Medical supplies worth approximately 12 million credits, his financial analyst reported with barely concealed excitement. Pharmaceutical inventory alone is worth 8 million, plus another 4 million in medical equipment and surgical instruments. This is going to be the biggest score we've ever made. Vega's crew was already celebrating their anticipated success when the docking procedures were completed. The Crimson Tide sealed itself against Mercy's Edge's auxiliary airlock, and Vega gave the order for his boarding teams to proceed. 30 criminals armed with military-grade weapons prepared to storm what they believed was a ship full of helpless medical professionals. What they were actually about to encounter was a crew of human nurses who had spent years developing creative solutions to impossible medical problems, who possessed intimate knowledge of anatomy across dozens of species, and who had never encountered a crisis they couldn't handle with the resources at hand. The pirates were about to discover that there was a significant difference between medical professionals who avoided violence and medical professionals who were simply very good at ending conflicts quickly and efficiently. As Team Alpha prepared to breach the medical ship's airlock, none of them realized they were about to become patients themselves, that their treatment would be far more comprehensive than anything they'd bargained for. The auxiliary airlock of the Mercy's Edge cycled open with the standard hiss of equalizing atmosphere, and Team Alpha stepped aboard what they expected to be a defenseless medical vessel. Carlos Santos led his squad through the entry corridor with practiced confidence, weapons drawn and intimidation tactics ready. What they found instead was a reception committee that immediately threw their entire operational plan into chaos. Standing in the airlock reception area was Nurse Patricia Williams, wearing standard medical scrubs and holding what appeared to be a routine medical scanner. She looked up from her tablet with the kind of professional smile that every experienced nurse had perfected, warm, welcoming, and completely unflappable in the face of any conceivable crisis. "Welcome aboard the Mercy's Edge," she said cheerfully, as if armed pirates were exactly what she'd been expecting. "I'm Patricia Williams, intake coordinator for emergency admissions. I see you're all carrying weapons. which suggests you might be experiencing some form of acute psychological distress. Don't worry, we specialize in crisis intervention. Santos stared at her in confusion. This wasn't how civilians were supposed to react to armed boarding parties. Where was the screaming, the panic, the immediate surrender? Lady, we're not patients, he managed. We're here too. Oh, I understand completely, Patricia interrupted with professional sympathy. Denial is a very common initial response to medical emergencies. But the fact that you sought out a medical facility while armed and displaying clear signs of agitation indicates that you're definitely experiencing some kind of health crisis. The good news is that we're fully equipped to help you work through whatever is troubling you. Behind Santos, his squad members were exchanging uncertain glances. Their briefings hadn't covered this scenario. The nurse seemed completely unconcerned by their weapons and was treating their hostile boarding action as if it were a routine medical consultation. Even more disturbing, she appeared to be genuinely eager to help them with problems they didn't actually have. Now then, Patricia continued, consulting her tablet, let's get some basic information for your intake forms. I'm seeing elevated stress indicators from all of you: increased heart rate, perspiration, aggressive posturing. These are classic symptoms of acute anxiety disorder, possibly complicated by underlying antisocial behavioral patterns. Team Alpha's communications specialist tried to restore order to the situation. This is a robbery, he announced loudly. We're taking control of this ship. Patricia nodded sympathetically. Yes, I can see how you might feel that way. Sudden feelings of wanting to take control are often associated with panic disorders. The important thing is that you've come to the right place for treatment. Dr. Michael Thompson is our staff psychiatrist, and he has excellent success rates with patients experiencing reality dissociation episodes. Meanwhile, Team Beta was discovering that the medical bay presented its own unique challenges. Diana Chen had expected to find a few nurses cowering behind surgical equipment. Instead, she walked into what appeared to be a fully operational trauma center, where the staff was calmly continuing their work, as if nothing unusual was happening. Head nurse Jennifer Martinez was reviewing patient charts when the armed pirates entered her domain. She looked up with the kind of measured assessment that came from years of evaluating incoming patients under emergency conditions. You must be the casualties from the distress call, she said matter-of-factly. Though I have to say, you're all looking remarkably healthy for people who supposedly needed emergency medical intervention. We're not casualties, Diana snapped, raising her weapon. We're taking control of this medical bay. Jennifer nodded. Thoughtfully, I see. Well, that explains the disconnect between your reported emergency and your current condition. You're obviously experiencing some form of delusional episode. Don't worry, we see this more often than you'd think, especially in deep space travelers. Prolonged exposure to hyperspace can sometimes cause temporary psychological disturbances. She gestured to emergency nurse David Johnson, who was preparing what appeared to be standard medical equipment. David, would you please prepare a mild sedative for our new patients? Something that will help them relax while we conduct proper psychological evaluations. David nodded and began assembling what looked like a routine injection kit. Should I prepare the restraint systems as well? He asked casually. These patients seem to be displaying signs of violent agitation. That's probably wise, Jennifer agreed. Safety first, especially with psychiatric emergencies. Diana was beginning to realize that something was seriously wrong with this situation. The medical staff wasn't behaving like victims they were, behaving like professionals dealing with a routine medical crisis. Even more unsettling, they seemed to genuinely believe that the pirates were patients suffering from mental health emergencies. Team Charlie was having the most straightforward experience, having successfully reached the cargo holds where the valuable pharmaceutical supplies were stored. Tommy Williams and his squad had encountered no resistance and were already beginning to catalog the ship's medical inventory. The cargo holds contained exactly what their intelligence had predicted. Millions of credits worth of pharmaceutical products, medical equipment, and surgical supplies. This is like hitting the lottery, one of Williams' team members reported over the CUM system. They've got enough medical supplies here to stock every black market clinic in 3 sectors. Williams was busy attempting to access the secure storage units when he noticed something odd about the cargo hold's environmental systems. The air circulation seemed unusually active, and there was a faint chemical smell that he couldn't quite identify. More concerning, several of his team members were beginning to complain of mild dizziness. "Hey boss," called out demolitions expert Frank Miller. "Is it just me, or does the air in here taste funny?" Williams paused in his work. Now that Miller mentioned it, there was something unusual about the atmosphere in the cargo hold. The environmental readings on his scanner showed normal oxygen levels, but there were traces of several compounds he couldn't identify. "Probably just medical ship air recycling," he said, though he was beginning to feel slightly lightheaded himself. What Williams didn't know was that the cargo hold's atmospheric systems had been modified by the ship's engineering staff to include what they called environmental mood stabilizers. These were mild pharmaceutical compounds that could be introduced into the air supply to help calm agitated patients during medical emergencies. The system had been activated the moment unauthorized personnel were detected in the secure storage areas. Back in the medical bay, Jennifer Martinez was conducting what appeared to be a routine psychiatric evaluation on Diana Chen's increasingly frustrated boarding team. "I'm seeing classic symptoms of group hysteria," she explained to David Johnson, while the pirates looked on in bewilderment. "Shared delusions about taking control of the ship, persistent belief that they're criminals rather than patients. It's a fascinating case study." "Should we notify the psychiatric ward?" David asked, preparing another round of medical equipment. "Definitely. And make sure they have the isolation rooms ready. These patients may need specialized treatment for their aggressive tendencies." Diana was rapidly losing control of the situation. Her team had come aboard expecting to encounter frightened medical personnel who would surrender immediately. Instead, they were being treated like mental patients by nurses who seemed genuinely convinced that armed piracy was actually a symptom of psychological illness. "Listen to me very carefully," Diana said, speaking slowly and clearly. "We are not patients. We are pirates. We're here to steal your medical supplies and take control of your ship." Jennifer nodded patiently. "Yes, I understand that's what you believe. But you have to realize that experiencing persistent criminal fantasies is actually a well-documented symptom of several psychological disorders. The good news is that most of these conditions are very treatable with proper medication and therapy." She turned to address Diana's entire team. "Now I need all of you to set down your weapons and allow us to conduct proper medical examinations. I know this might seem frightening, but psychiatric episodes can be dangerous if left untreated. We're here to help you through this crisis." As Team Alpha continued their increasingly surreal encounter with Nurse Patricia Williams, Team Beta found themselves being psychoanalyzed by the trauma center staff, and Team Charlie began experiencing the subtle effects of the cargo hold's atmospheric modifications. It was becoming clear that the pirates' carefully planned operation was not proceeding according to their expectations. What none of them realized was that they hadn't even encountered the most experienced members of the nursing staff yet, and that their situation was about to become significantly more complicated as Mercy's Edge responded to their unauthorized boarding with the full range of medical interventions at their disposal. Captain Sarah Chen was monitoring the situation from the bridge when she made the decision that would transform a simple pirate raid into what medical journals would later describe as the most comprehensive emergency psychiatric intervention in recorded galactic history. The unauthorized boarding had triggered every security protocol aboard the Mercy's Edge. But instead of calling for military assistance, Chen activated what the crew called Code White, a medical emergency designation that classified the intruders as patients suffering from acute psychological crisis. "All departments, this is the captain," her voice echoed through the ship's communication system. "We have multiple patients aboard displaying symptoms of severe reality dissociation disorder with violent tendencies. All medical staff are authorized to implement emergency psychiatric protocols as needed to ensure patient and crew safety." In the medical bay, this announcement was received with the kind of professional enthusiasm that only experienced trauma nurses could muster. Surgical nurse Amanda Foster had just completed preparing what she described as therapeutic intervention equipment. When the captain's message confirmed what the nursing staff had already suspected, their uninvited guests were clearly suffering from a group psychological breakdown that required immediate treatment. This is actually quite exciting from a medical perspective, Amanda explained to her colleague, ICU nurse Robert Taylor, as they prepared their intervention strategies. Group psychosis cases are relatively rare, especially involving this many. Subjects displaying identical symptoms will probably be able to publish papers on this case for years. Robert was calibrating what appeared to be standard medical monitoring equipment. Though the settings he was selecting seemed unusually specific, I've never seen such a clear-cut case of criminal role-playing disorder, he agreed. The patients are so completely committed to their delusion that they actually brought prop weapons and everything. Meanwhile, Team Alpha was discovering that their situation had progressed far beyond simply being misunderstood. Nurse Patricia Williams had been joined by pediatric specialist Nancy Davis, who brought with her an arsenal of medical equipment that she assured the increasingly agitated Pirates was perfectly standard for treating adult patients experiencing childhood trauma regression. Now I understand that you're all very upset, Nancy said in the kind of soothing voice that could calm a screaming infant or, as it turned out, thoroughly unnerved hardened criminals. But we need to address the underlying issues that are causing you two act out these violent fantasies. Carlos, isn't it? I can see from your stress indicators that you're dealing with some very deep-seated anxiety. Carlos Santos was experiencing emotions he hadn't felt since his first amateur burglary attempt went disastrously wrong. The nurses weren't just refusing to be intimidated, they were actively analyzing his psychological state and offering to help him work through what they insisted were his emotional problems. Lady, for the last time, we're not having psychological problems, we're robbing your ship. Oh, honey, Patricia replied with genuine sympathy. That's exactly what someone having psychological problems would say. It's called projection. You're attributing your internal confusion to external circumstances. But don't worry, we have excellent treatment protocols for exactly this kind of crisis. Nancy was preparing what she described as a mild anxiolytic to help with your obvious panic response. When the ship's intercom crackled with an announcement from medical technician Lisa Chin, all nursing stations, be advised that we're seeing elevated stress hormones across all unauthorized personnel. Recommend implementing standard calm-down procedures. Team Beta was experiencing the full scope of what the medical staff considered appropriate crisis intervention. Diana Chen had made the mistake of demanding that head nurse Jennifer Martinez stop treating her crew like patients, which Jennifer interpreted as a clear request for more intensive psychological support. I completely understand your frustration, Jennifer said, reviewing what appeared to be rapidly compiled psychological profiles on her tablet. Resistance to treatment is very common in patients experiencing acute paranoid episodes. What we have protocols specifically designed to help people work through exactly these kinds of delusions. Dr. Michael Thompson had arrived to conduct what he described as emergency psychiatric consultations. A specialist in deep space psychology, he'd seen every conceivable form of stress-induced mental breakdown that could affect travelers in the galaxy's most remote regions. What he hadn't expected was to encounter such a textbook case of group hysteria involving criminal role-playing. This is fascinating, he told Jennifer as he observed the pirates' increasingly desperate attempts to convince the medical staff that they were actually criminals. They've developed such an elaborate shared fantasy that they've even coordinated their stories. The level of detail in their criminal personas suggests this psychological break has been developing for some time. Emergency nurse David Johnson was documenting everything with the thoroughness of someone who knew this case would be discussed in medical schools for decades. Should I prepare the psychiatric hold paperwork? He asked. These patients are clearly a danger to themselves and potentially others if their delusions aren't properly treated. Absolutely, Dr. Thompson replied. In fact, I think we should consider this a teaching case. When was the last time we had the opportunity to observe such a comprehensive group psychotic episode? Diana was beginning to understand that the medical staff's complete refusal to acknowledge their criminal intent wasn't just stubbornness. It was a systematically applied psychiatric interpretation of their presence that made any form of traditional piracy impossible. How do you threaten people who are genuinely convinced that your threats are actually cries for help? Team Charlie was facing an entirely different set of challenges in the cargo holds. The atmospheric modifications had progressed from mild mood stabilizers to what environmental engineer Kevin Park described as enhanced relaxation therapy. Tommy Williams and his crew were finding it increasingly difficult to focus on their mission as waves of inexplicable calm washed over them. "I feel weird," reported demolitions expert Frank Miller, who was sitting on the floor examining his hands with unusual fascination. "Like, really peaceful. Is this normal for a robbery?" Williams was fighting against what felt like the most potent stress relief medication he'd ever encountered. His criminal instincts were telling him to grab the valuable pharmaceuticals and escape, but his brain seemed more interested in lying down and taking a relaxing nap. "The air," he managed to say. "Is there something in the air?" Medical technician Lisa Chin's voice came through the cargo hold's communication system with professional concern. "Attention cargo hold occupants. Your stress levels are showing dangerous spikes or increasing the therapeutic atmospheric concentration to help manage your obvious anxiety. Please remain calm while we prepare appropriate treatment protocols." In the main medical bay, the situation had evolved into what could only be described as the most comprehensive, involuntary medical examination in piracy history. The nursing staff had efficiently divided the members of Team Beta into individual examination rooms, where they were receiving what Amanda Foster described as complete psychiatric workups to determine the underlying causes of their criminal ideation. "The blood work is particularly interesting," Amanda reported to her colleagues. "Elevated adrenaline, irregular sleep patterns, and nutritional deficiencies consistent with prolonged stress. These patients have clearly been struggling with their psychological problems for quite some time. I see you." Nurse Robert Taylor was monitoring what appeared to be standard medical equipment, though the readings he was tracking seemed unusually comprehensive. "I'm seeing patterns consistent with chronic anxiety disorder, possibly complicated by antisocial personality traits. We should probably consider long-term treatment options." As the nursing staff continued their enthusiastic medical evaluation of their uninvited patients, the pirates were beginning to realize that they'd encountered something far more challenging than military resistance or law enforcement intervention. They were facing a crew of medical professionals who had somehow managed to transform a criminal raid into a comprehensive healthcare crisis, and who seemed genuinely excited about the opportunity to provide treatment whether their patients wanted it or not. The most disturbing part, from the pirates' perspective, was that the medical staff appeared to be completely sincere in their desire to help. This wasn't a stalling tactic or a clever defense strategy. These nurses actually believed that armed piracy was a symptom of treatable psychological illness, and they were determined to provide the best possible care for their unwilling patients. Situation aboard the Mercy's Edge had evolved into what charge nurse Stephanie Miller would later describe in her incident report as the most comprehensive multidisciplinary psychiatric intervention in the history of deep space medicine. What had begun as a straightforward pirate raid had transformed into an impromptu medical conference, with nursing staff from across the ship converging to observe and participate in what they considered a once-in-a-lifetime learning opportunity. Geriatric specialist Helen Rodriguez had arrived from the ship's extended care facility with equipment specifically designed for treating elderly patients experiencing cognitive decline. However, she'd quickly adapted her protocols for what she now referred to as adults displaying regressive criminal behavior patterns. Her assessment of Team Alpha was thorough and deeply unsettling to the pirates who found themselves subjected to memory tests, coordination exercises, and what she called reality orientation therapy. "Carlos, I need you to tell me what year it is and where you think you are," Helen said gently, holding up cards with simple pictures on them. "I know you believe you're conducting some kind of criminal activity, but I want to see if we can help you reconnect with actual reality." Carlos Santos was experiencing a level of frustration he'd never imagined possible. "It's 2387. We're on a medical ship called the Mercy's Edge, and we're trying to rob you," shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. "Yeah, that's very good." Helen replied encouragingly, "You're oriented to time and place, which suggests this is more of a behavioral disorder than actual dementia. That's excellent news for your treatment prognosis." The rest of Team Alpha was undergoing what psychiatric nurse practitioner James Wilson described as emergency group therapy sessions. James had specialized in treating combat veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress, and he was convinced that the pirates' criminal behavior was actually a manifestation of unresolved trauma from their difficult backgrounds. "I want everyone to form a circle," James instructed, completely ignoring the fact that his patients were armed and increasingly agitated. "We're going to start with some basic trust exercises to help you work through whatever experiences led you to develop these antisocial coping mechanisms." One of the pirates made the mistake of actually asking what he meant by antisocial coping mechanisms, which James interpreted as a breakthrough moment in establishing therapeutic rapport. "Excellent question. Antisocial behavior often develops as a defense mechanism against feelings of powerlessness or abandonment. By acting out criminal fantasies, you're actually trying to regain a sense of control over your environment." Meanwhile, Team Beta was discovering that the medical bay contained resources they'd never anticipated. Trauma nurse coordinator Maria Gonzalez had arrived with what she described as specialized equipment for treating patients experiencing violent ideation. This equipment included restraint systems that she assured the increasingly worried pirates were completely standard for ensuring patient safety during psychological crises. "Now I understand that being restrained might feel frightening," Maria explained as she and her team efficiently secured Diana Chen's squad to medical examination tables. "But these safety measures are necessary to prevent you from injuring yourselves while we conduct comprehensive neurological evaluations." Dr. Thompson was reviewing brain scan results with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for groundbreaking medical discoveries. "Fascinating," he exclaimed, pointing to readings on his monitor. "Look at these neural activity patterns. Classic indicators of chronic stress response, but with some unusual variations that suggest prolonged exposure to higher-risk environments." Neurology specialist Dr. Rachel Kim had joined the evaluation team with equipment capable of conducting real-time analysis of brain chemistry. "I'm seeing elevated cortisol levels consistent with fight-or-flight response," she reported, "but also some interesting neurotransmitter imbalances that might explain their persistent criminal ideation." Diana was beginning to understand that the medical staff's approach to their situation was becoming increasingly sophisticated and uncomfortably thorough. You can't just strap people to tables and perform brain scans without consent. Captain Marcus Vega had been monitoring the situation from the bridge of the Crimson Tide for over 2 hours, and what he was hearing through his boarding team's communication channels defied every assumption he'd ever made about medical ship operations. Instead of reports about secured cargo and compliant crew members, he was receiving increasingly frantic transmissions that sounded more like patient therapy sessions than military operations. "Captain, we need immediate extraction," came Diana Chen's voice, though it was partially obscured by what sounded like a medical professional explaining the benefits of meditation therapy. "They've got us hooked up to some kind of brain monitoring equipment, and they keep asking us about our childhood traumas." Vega's second-in-command, Alina Rodriguez, was reviewing the tactical displays with growing confusion. "Sir, the medical ship hasn't called for any outside assistance. There's no distress signals, no military alerts. According to our sensors, they're just continuing normal operations while treating our boarding teams like patients." The situation became even more surreal. When Mercy's Edge opened a communication channel to the Crimson Tide, Captain Sarah Chen appeared on the view screen wearing a concerned expression that belonged in a hospital conference room rather than a hostile boarding situation. "Captain Vega, I presume?" she said with professional courtesy. "Captain Chen of the medical frigate Mercy's Edge. I wanted to discuss the condition of your crew members. We're currently receiving treatment in our facilities." Vega stared at her in bewilderment. "Treatment? They're conducting a boarding operation."
"Oh my,"
Captain Chen replied with genuine sympathy. "I can see that you're also experiencing some reality orientation difficulties. This is more serious than we initially thought. Your crew members are clearly suffering from a group psychological crisis, and it appears that you might be the primary source of their shared delusion." She consulted what appeared to be a medical chart, according to our psychiatric evaluation. "Team, your crew members are all experiencing identical symptoms. Persistent criminal fantasies. Difficulty distinguishing between reality and role-playing scenarios. What our specialists describe as acute leadership-induced psychological dependency. Have you been encouraging these delusions, Captain?" Alina Rodriguez leaned over to whisper urgently in Vega's ear. Sir, I think they genuinely believe our crew is having some kind of mental breakdown. They're not treating this as a criminal attack. They think it's a medical emergency. Meanwhile, aboard Mercy's Edge, the medical staff had reached what clinical coordinator Dr. Susan Taylor described as the implementation phase of comprehensive treatment protocols. The nursing teams had been reorganized into specialized treatment groups, each focused on different aspects of what they now considered a complex multi-patient psychological crisis requiring coordinated intervention. Addiction counselor Mark Stevens had taken charge of what he called substance abuse evaluation and intervention. His assessment was that the pirates' criminal behavior was likely connected to underlying addiction issues that were driving them to seek easily convertible assets, like pharmaceutical supplies. This is actually quite common, he explained to physical therapist Lisa Wong as they reviewed patient files. Individuals suffering from substance dependency often engage in criminal behavior as a way to fund their addiction. The fact that they specifically targeted a medical ship suggests they're probably seeking controlled substances. Lisa was conducting mobility assessments on Team Alpha, testing their coordination and physical responses as part of what she described as comprehensive wellness evaluation. The pirates found themselves subjected to balance tests, flexibility measurements, and what Lisa called functional movement screening to identify any physical limitations that might be contributing to their behavioral problems. Carlos, I need you to try touching your toes, Lisa instructed, completely ignoring the fact that Carlos Santos was still attempting to explain that he was there to commit robbery, not receive physical therapy. I'm seeing some tension patterns that suggest chronic stress. Have you been experiencing any back pain or muscle stiffness that might be affecting your mood? Occupational therapist Daniel Kim had joined the evaluation team with equipment designed to assess what he called life skills deficits that might be contributing to antisocial career choices. He was conducting detailed interviews about the pirates' daily routines, his personal hygiene habits, and ability to maintain healthy relationships. Tell me about your typical day, Daniel said to one of the increasingly exasperated pirates. You maintain regular sleep schedules? Are you eating nutritious meals? How would you describe your social support network? The pirate stared at him in disbelief. A typical day involves robbing ships and selling stolen goods on the black market. See? Daniel nodded sympathetically. So you're experiencing significant disruption in normal daily activities, along with what sounds like social isolation and possible nutritional deficiencies. These are all factors that can contribute to the development of antisocial behavior patterns. Team Beta was receiving what infectious disease specialist Dr. Patricia Adams described as comprehensive health screening, to rule out any medical conditions that might be influencing their psychological state. The pirates found themselves subjected to blood tests, neurological examinations, and what Dr. Adams called full pathogen panels to ensure that their behavioral symptoms aren't being caused by underlying infections. Certain bacterial and viral infections can cause personality changes and aggressive behavior, she explained to her nursing staff as they collected samples from the increasingly overwhelmed pirates. We need to rule out any biological causes. Before we can properly treat their psychological symptoms, nutritionist Rebecca Johnson had arrived with detailed questionnaires about the pirates, dietary habits, and what she described as metabolic factors that might be contributing to their emotional instability. She was convinced that poor nutrition was a significant factor in their criminal behavior and had begun developing what she called therapeutic meal plans designed to support improved mental health. When was the last time you had a balanced meal with adequate protein and complex carbohydrates? She asked Diana Chen, who was still strapped to a medical examination table. Nutritional deficiencies can cause irritability, poor decision-making, and what we call food-seeking behaviors that might manifest as criminal activity. Team Charlie's situation in the cargo holds had evolved into what aromatherapy specialist Dr. Monica Lee described as intensive sensory intervention therapy. The atmospheric modifications had been supplemented with carefully selected music, controlled lighting patterns, and what she called therapeutic tactile experiences, designed to promote emotional healing. We're seeing excellent responses, too. The multisensory approach, she reported to her colleagues. The patients are displaying significantly reduced agitation and improved emotional regulation. I'm recommending that we continue the current treatment protocol while gradually introducing more intensive therapeutic interventions. Tommy Williams was experiencing what felt like the most effective stress reduction therapy in Galactic history, though he was still aware enough to realize that his criminal career was probably over. His team members were arranged around the cargo hold like participants in the galaxy's most expensive spa treatment, completely unable to focus on anything more demanding than breathing and enjoying the therapeutic environment. The medical staff had begun coordinating their various treatment approaches through what Chief Medical Officer Dr. Richard Martinez called integrated care planning sessions. Representatives from each specialty were meeting regularly to discuss their patients' progress and develop comprehensive treatment strategies. We're dealing with a fascinating case of group psychology, Dr. Martinez explained to the assembled medical team. 37 individuals, all displaying identical symptoms of criminal role-playing disorder. It's clearly led by a charismatic figure who has convinced them that illegal activities are normal behavior. Social worker Jennifer Park had been conducting detailed interviews with the pirates about their family backgrounds, educational experiences, and what she called formative life events that might have contributed to their current psychological state. Her assessment was that the entire group was suffering from what she described as complex trauma responses manifesting as antisocial behavior patterns. The good news, she reported to her colleagues, is that group therapy approaches tend to be very effective for patients who have developed shared psychological symptoms. We can use their existing social bonds to support positive behavioral changes. As the medical staff continued their enthusiastic implementation of comprehensive treatment protocols, Captain Vega was beginning to understand that his carefully planned heist had become something unprecedented in the history of galactic piracy, a situation where the victims were more determined to help the criminals than the criminals were to commit crimes. The most disturbing aspect of the entire situation was that the medical staff seemed to be genuinely enjoying their work, treating the pirates' presence as an unexpected opportunity to practice their professional skills on a rare and challenging case study. 6 hours after what would become known throughout the galaxy as the Great Medical Intervention of 2387, Captain Marcus Vega found himself sitting in Mercy's Edge's conference room, signing what billing administrator Carol Thompson described as comprehensive treatment acknowledgement forms and rehabilitation program enrollment documents. The papers in front of him detailed the most expensive medical bill in piracy history, along with payment plan options that stretched well into the next decade. "Now, Captain Vega," said Discharge Planning Coordinator Dr. Alan Foster, reviewing the extensive documentation with professional satisfaction, "we've developed several options for your crew's continued care. Option 1 involves immediate transfer to a specialized psychiatric facility for long-term treatment. Option 2 is our innovative outpatient rehabilitation program, which allows your crew members to remain together while receiving ongoing therapeutic support." Vega stared at the paperwork in numb disbelief. Somehow, his criminal enterprise had been transformed into what appeared to be a legitimate medical case, requiring extensive follow-up care. "What about option 3, where we just leave and pretend this never happened?" Dr. Foster looked genuinely concerned. "My captain, that wouldn't be medically responsible at all. Your crew has made remarkable progress during their initial treatment, but psychiatric conditions like group criminal ideation disorder require ongoing care to prevent relapse. We simply can't discharge patients who still might be a danger to themselves or others." The rehabilitation program that the medical staff had developed was comprehensive beyond anything Vega could have imagined. Career counselor Anthony Davis had conducted detailed assessments of each crew member's skills and interests, developing what he called individualized professional development plans that channeled their existing talents into legitimate career paths. "Your demolitions expert, Tommy Williams, has shown excellent aptitude for construction work," Anthony explained enthusiastically. "With proper training, he could easily transition from blowing things up illegally to blowing things up with proper permits and safety oversight. It's really just a matter of redirecting his existing skills towards socially beneficial applications." Vocational rehabilitation specialist Dr. Jennifer Walsh had been even more creative in her career recommendations. "Your tactical officer, Diana, Chen has demonstrated excellent leadership skills and strategic thinking abilities. We think she'd make an outstanding emergency response coordinator. Many of the skills involved in planning criminal operations are directly transferable to disaster management and crisis intervention work. The medical staff had documented everything with the thoroughness of professionals who knew their work would be studied by colleagues across the galaxy. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Richard Martinez was already planning to present their case at the next Galactic Medical Conference, describing it as a breakthrough demonstration of how comprehensive medical intervention can successfully treat even the most severe cases of antisocial behavior disorder. What we've proven here, he explained to Captain Chen as they reviewed the treatment outcomes, is that criminal behavior is fundamentally a medical condition that responds well to appropriate therapeutic intervention. These patients came aboard our ship displaying clear symptoms of psychological distress. We've been able to provide effective treatment that addresses the root causes of their antisocial tendencies. The pirates themselves were experiencing what psychiatric evaluation specialist Dr. Emma Rodriguez has described as therapeutic breakthrough responses to intensive medical intervention. After hours of comprehensive psychological evaluation, medical examination, what the staff called supportive counseling, many of them were beginning to question whether their criminal careers had really been the best life choices. Carlos Santos had spent 3 hours in individual therapy with counselor James Wilson, discussing what James described as the underlying emotional needs that criminal activity was attempting to fulfill. The session had been so thorough that Carlos was beginning to wonder whether he'd actually become a pirate, because he was seeking the kind of excitement and camaraderie that he'd been missing in his legitimate work experiences. "Do you know what's weird?" he said to his fellow former pirates as they sat in what the medical staff called the recovery lounge, a comfortable area where patients could process their therapeutic experiences. "I actually feel better than I have in years. When's the last time anyone asked me about my career goals or whether I was getting enough sleep?" Frank Miller, who had been subjected to what wellness coordinator Dr. Patricia Kim described as holistic health optimization therapy, was experiencing similar confusion about his life choices. "These people spent more time on my nutrition and exercise habits in one day than I've thought about in the last 5 years. Did you know that my chronic back pain was probably related to vitamin D deficiency?" Team Charlie's experience with intensive environmental therapy had left them in what aromatherapy specialist Dr. Monica Lee described as a state of enhanced emotional clarity and improved self-awareness. The atmospheric modifications had been so effective that several of Tommy Williams' crew members were asking whether the medical ship offered employment opportunities for people interested in legitimate work. "I mean, this is actually a really nice working environment," observed former pirate technician Sarah Davis as she looked around the spotlessly clean, efficiently organized medical facilities. "Good benefits, meaningful work, job security. When's the last time we had health insurance in our line of work?" The financial aspects of their situation had been handled by patient financial services coordinator Michelle Carter, who had developed what she described as innovative payment solutions for patients with non-traditional income sources. The pirates' medical bills were substantial. The payment plans were structured around their participation in the rehabilitation program. "Think of it as an investment in your future," Michelle explained to the assembled former criminals. "Yes. The comprehensive medical evaluation and treatment program is expensive, but you're also receiving job training, career counseling, and ongoing health care that will benefit you for the rest of your lives." The most surprising development came when several crew members of the Mercy's Edge approached the former pirates about potential employment opportunities. Head nurse Jennifer Martinez had been impressed by their organizational skills and ability to work effectively under pressure. "You know," she said to Diana Chen during what had started as a discharge planning session, "we're always looking for qualified people who can handle high-stress situations and work well as part of a team. Have you ever considered a career in emergency medical services?" Environmental engineer Kevin Park had been similarly impressed by Tommy Williams' technical abilities. "The modifications you were trying to make to our security systems were actually quite sophisticated," he admitted. "We could use someone with your skills working on legitimate engineering projects. Plus, the pay is better than piracy and significantly less likely to result in imprisonment." Captain Vega found himself facing the most difficult decision of his criminal career, whether to accept what amounted to a complete life change disguised as a medical treatment program. The rehabilitation plan that Dr. Foster had developed included not just individual therapy and job training, but also what he called group reintegration support that would help the former pirates maintain their social connections while pursuing legitimate careers. We've seen excellent results with patients who complete our full rehabilitation program, Dr. Forster explained. The recidivism rate for criminal behavior drops to virtually zero when individuals receive comprehensive medical treatment combined with appropriate career placement and ongoing support services. The Crimson Tide had been impounded by the medical ship's security protocols, which classified it as therapeutic equipment being held pending patient recovery. However, financial coordinator Michelle Carter had developed a creative solution that would allow the former pirates to maintain their ship while using it for legitimate purposes. Medical supply transport is always in demand in frontier sectors, she explained. With proper licensing and certification, your vessel could be converted into a legitimate cargo hauler specializing in emergency medical deliveries. It's exciting work, socially beneficial, and the profit margins are actually better than piracy when you factor in the reduced legal and medical expenses. 3 months later, the former crew of the Crimson Tide was operating under a new name, Second Chance Medical Transport. Captain Marcus Vega had completed his certification as an emergency medical transport coordinator. Diana Chen had become a licensed crisis management specialist, and Tommy Williams was working as a certified medical equipment installation technician. The case study from their treatment had become required reading in medical schools across human space, used as an example of how comprehensive healthcare could address even the most challenging behavioral disorders. Dr. Richard Martinez had received several prestigious awards for what the Galactic Medical Association described as innovative therapeutic intervention techniques that demonstrate the true potential of medical science to transform lives. Head nurse Jennifer Martinez kept the original incident report framed in her office, next to a thank you card from the former pirates' rehabilitation graduation ceremony. When new nursing staff asked about the card, she would smile and explain that sometimes the best medical outcomes came from treating patients who didn't initially realize they needed help. The Mercy's Edge continued its mission of providing medical care throughout the galaxy. Though they did add a small notation to their standard operating procedures, all crew members should be prepared to provide comprehensive medical intervention for patients presenting with acute criminal ideation disorder. Treatment protocols should emphasize rehabilitation over punishment, with focus on addressing underlying psychological and social factors contributing to antisocial behavior patterns. And if the ship's medical supplies now included an unusually comprehensive inventory of psychiatric medications and rehabilitation equipment, well, as Captain Chen liked to say, it was always better to be prepared for any medical emergency that might come aboard, whether the patients arrived through the airlock or through the hull. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.